This is Miracle Healings, and I am Leslie Williams. And we all heard about chronic disease and all the struggles that so many people go through when they have to deal with chronic disease. Our guest in the show today not only went through all this process, but she was able to transform all the struggle in pain in healing, and today she helps others to overcome their struggles. Laura Furey, thank you so much for being in the show with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be
Yeah,
here.
it's my pleasure. I was so excited when I was reading your email because I'm so sure that so many of our listeners will resonate with your story and everything that you were able to achieve in your process of healing. Yeah.
So, I know one of the biggest things I struggled with, especially because I was hit with everything at a really young age, was not being able to relate to other people. I didn't
Mhm.
know many people walking that journey. I did have one friend who I met like a couple years in. Um, so everything I was reading had to go, and social media was not as big as it is right now. I mean, it was
Right.
there, but the communities and all the groups that exist and stuff, at least to my knowledge, wasn't particularly prevalent back then. So I
Hmm.
definitely can relate to, wanting to hear stories. And for me
Hmm.
back then, I was reading a lot of stories, and I know that's what kept me kind of going. Um,
Hmm.
no matter what, whether it was from something completely irrelevant or,
Hmm.
just somebody's journey with something that seemed
Right.
impossible.
Right. And how old were you and how it started?
So it all started, it was a really slow is not the right word, a gradual decline. It started when I was 20 in college. I
Hmm.
got mono, which is also known as glandular fever in other parts of the world.
Hmm.
Epstein-Barr virus, essentially, mononucleosis.
Hmm.
And so I had that. I definitely had, looking back, I didn't see that at the time, but I always think there's a perfect storm brewing. I had the emotional components going on at the same time.
Hmm.
Um, they weren't particularly obvious. I think looking back,
Hmm.
I can see that now.
Right.
Um, and it was sort of the the ball started rolling from there, and that was downhill. So it was sort of one thing
Right.
after the next.
And you had
For
any symptoms?
Yeah, so I with the mono, I mean, and that was the progression. I mean, that was normal. That's what was considered normal. I mean, I was,
Hmm.
sleeping 12 hours a day. I was so exhausted, flu-like, super sore throat. They kept giving me antibiotics for strep throat. I
Hmm.
lost weight. My appetite, like I don't even think my appetite changed that much, but I just lost weight, I think, from being ill. Um,
Right.
and just fatigued super super easily. And so that started, and that was supposed to be a few months. They expected that. They want you like resting as much as possible because your spleen can be enlarged, and all of that. But it was sort of like after that initial period, it was like things aren't quite right. And
Hmm.
there was all these things happening concurrently that I thought were separate. I happened to fracture a bone in my foot right when I got sick, and they
Right.
just thought it was from running. And then I gradually lost my period after getting sick. It was sort of going longer and longer, and then it disappeared, and I started having menopause symptoms. And then I started having, the foot wasn't healing. I
Hmm.
started having terrible bladder pain. I was also really foggy all the time. I was feeling down. And then when went to the gynecologist because I was like, I haven't had my period in I don't know, 3, 4 months at that point. And,
Right.
they were like, oh, yeah, no big deal. Happens all the time,
So,
whatever.
apart from leaving all the physical challenges you were dealing with your emotions, because the
Hmm.
physical challenge lead us to have all the emotions, and then you were going to all these doctors, right?
Exactly.
From one appointment
Exactly.
to another. I'm
Another.
going to this details because I'm pretty sure some listeners will identify with the situation,
Yes. Yes.
right? And at that moment, were you finding answers?
No. I
Okay.
was getting bounced around
Mm-hmm.
from special. That was just like the gynecologist being like, "Oh yeah, this will be no big deal," and then they do, they give you the Provera challenge, and I failed that, and she's like, "Oh my god, I don't know what to do," and sends me to a reproductive endocrinologist. And even with my foot, I'm getting bounced around to. I think I saw probably one podiatrist and 3 or 4 orthopedics, maybe more. I was in and out of PT. The other stuff, I don't know when I got to the functional medicine and naturopathic route probably by the fall of the following year.
Mm-hmm.
Because
So
again, it
like
was a more
you
gradual.
a year struggling to
Um,
all these different diagnoses.
yes, that's right. That felt like the longest year of my life. So when you say it, it takes me a minute to
Mm-hmm.
pause because it felt so long and so much was transforming during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that summer I did do a full-time internship. I was in a boot because that foot hadn't healed and they were
Right.
playing with birth control and hormone replacement, all of those things. And I thought, I look back and that was sort of the last summer of quote unquote the traditional normalcy of the 40 hours a week and whatever. And then when I had
Mm-hmm.
surgery on the foot, I didn't come out quite the same. And now I was fatiguing from such minor things. Within a few hours, I'd be so exhausted and
Mm-hmm.
couldn't really think straight. And yes, at this point, the emotional is really catching up to me and just really down
Right.
and anxious. And
Right.
also, what the hell is going on? And
Because you could
nobody can.
not finance. So
No, nobody could tell me except maybe this, maybe that. Oh, you have some thyroid
right.
antibody, and
So,
that you start to feel crazy. I did. I
mm-hmm.
started to. I remember saying to my mom at one point, like I was like, "Am I just crazy?" And that was distressing within itself. And I mean, I from there, I still saw a gazillion more specialists, but
Uh-huh.
um, I
So
also,
were
you were
you
fighting
feeling
with life.
right? And were you feeling hopeless,
Oh my,
isolation?
just so. Yeah, especially at that age, I mean,
Right.
I
You're
was
27 years
right.
old,
I was
right?
21 at that time. I was only 21. I'm now almost 31. um, but at that time, we were in college, and everybody was focused on their senior year and on what they were going to do for their career. And it was just sort of, I think there's an entitlement at a younger age of just like, I'm not supposed to go through bad things. It's like life's supposed to be fun and
Yes.
easy, and I'm not
Yes.
supposed to have to go through difficult things. And
Exactly. Because our expectations are completely
exactly,
different from what you were living. Like as
exactly,
you're saying, we expect to
exactly,
be young and happy and
ex-
doing all the things that a
exactly,
college student would be doing with a lot
exactly,
of energy, and you were into sports because you were running, right? All
exactly,
that, and hanging with your friends and not having to deal with your life threatening, right?
exactly. And by that last semester, by the fall, I had to go to part time, and I was home on the weekends with a 4-day weekend. We're trying to go to doctors. And the spring, I was still so determined to try to. I was like ahead. I had gotten ahead in school so that I could intern abroad my last semester. And I think at that point, I was looking at Chile. Um, and I remember when it finally hit me, I think in like February, that this just it was not plausible. I was not going to be able to be living abroad when I was having all these days where I like couldn't get out of bed. Uh, and I remember, I think I definitely, and I say this in a really non-judgmental way to myself or to, I was very much stuck in the victim mindset and again, that's completely non-judgmental of just sort of, why is this happening to me? And one thing after the next is being started taking away. I remember it was like, then I found some yoga and I could kind of, I had lost running at this point. I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't bike anymore. I know. So then I went to biking. Then I stopped being able to bike because of the extreme fatigue and muscle weakness. Then I found some yoga, and I remember then looking back, it was this hypermobility split. I injured my shoulder a bit, and I remember the physical therapist was like, well, that down dog and yoga is probably not the best. And I remember thinking, like, no, like every single thing I like is being taken away from me. And I remember feeling so angry and just so that it was unjust and and I definitely, after that, I think by May, so we're about almost 2 years in, I was on a day trip with my best friend, and I got a stomach bug, like some type of food poisoning. And it was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And at this point, I mean, I couldn't move from the bed for 36 hours. I was just whimpering the whole night, and it was so hard to put into words. I really felt like my entire body was shutting down. It couldn't even flip over. And I remember, I threw up in the morning. I was like, okay, it must be food poisoning. And the thing is that it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. And I remember I had to like lay in the back seat of my grandfather's car to get to a doctor in New York City. And there I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, which is also known as myalgic encephalomyelitis around the world now. And I remember I had been hearing about it, but I didn't think it was a real thing. I thought it was just sort of like when we don't know what to do with you, we call it that. And little did I know when I entered that world, like, no, there's 2.5 million people dealing with this. And, it really is, it's own illness with its own set of symptoms, particularly like that post-exertional malaise, an increase in symptoms after doing, some kind of physical exertion, sometimes mental exertion. And I remember I would dance with feeling empowered. I was starting to discover like Reiki and spirituality and all of those things, and doing the integrative route of both kind of the supplements and medications. And I, would land in these places like, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to get better. Like, but I couldn't stay there. So, I would land there for 36 hours. And then, whether it was, in that time and diagnosis, I mean, I can't, if I sat here giving you every diagnosis I had racked up, like they found out that I had osteoporosis. Here I'm at 22. There was no explanation for how I could have osteoporosis, and all the bones in my feet were so weak, and you need to exercise, yet I couldn't get out of bed. And my period had never come back, and on and off, it was just nonstop.
So it was completely avalanched physically,
totally,
emotionally, all kinds of different ways.
Every
and
level.
Then you were trying to, as I mentioned, you're trying to go in the path where you can start to find inner healing and inner answers to then shift, right? So
and I'd have those moments.
After that, did you have like a breakthrough moment?
Oh yeah, I definitely remember I had this. I'm backtracking for a second because it's kind of important. So like, I would get really caught up with the physical. So sometimes my empowerment would be like that. That's a really important part of the, if people can relate to this, but it would be like, oh, it's just this diet that I need to do. And, I'm not talking about I'm not talking about calorie. I'm talking about like, oh, this autoimmune diet or this anti-inflammatory diet. And I had that bladder disease, and even conventional medicine will be like, you need to stay off acidic things, right? Like, so it's like, oh, I'll do this and this IBS diet, or I'll do the IBD diet, I could give you every name of all these things, right? And so it would be like, oh, it's this diet. And then it'd be going to a doctor and it'd be like, no, it's this treatment. It's this thing. Oh my gosh, if we correct this, this will fix it. And
trying all different approaches physically, but even if it were better approach, right? Focus on a better diet and even
it never helped. It was like I'd get these glimpses and it was the same thing. They put me on hormone replacement. It wasn't that I didn't go without a period for 2 years, but it's like, make
I
me feel
love that
better
you're
for
bringing this, Laura. Thank you so much because I know a few people who are going for exactly the same
right,
thing, right?
right.
And of course, so many people, not only the ones I know, but the listeners and the viewers, and so many people are going probably
Yeah,
right now for exactly
yeah.
this what you mentioned.
And I get this, and then you've researched it all. And I had that
Yeah.
skill. I had wanted to go into consulting because I have the ability to research into the ground and analyze and all that stuff. So I could find anything. And I became sort of my own worst enemy in terms of knowing too much. And sometimes when I coach people, I'm like, you got to undo what you know for a while, because I knew about like every diet, every functional medicine piece of this,
Hmm.
probably even every conventional route of this, and this treatment. I became, actually, this is sort of over those next few years, extremely controlling of everything, because it
Hmm.
was my way to try to claim some sense of normalcy or
Hmm.
make me think I'm doing something. So, yeah,
Hmm.
and I get really excited. And I remember when I stopped doing that after a while, because it was just ridiculous. It was like, oh my God, how many times have we said, like, oh, this treatment will do it, or this treatment will do it, or correcting this, or like, oh, even if you found an
Hmm.
imbalance on some kind of diagnostic functional thing, right? Like
Hmm.
learning over time that didn't really translate, for my case, didn't translate into much. And so I remember then I'm dabbling in reading all the books and the spiritual piece. And I remember I had a breakthrough. Oof. We're probably 2 years in. We're kind of doing a dance of going forwards and backwards right now. And I remember it was this feeling, it just didn't hold. So it's not that profound for me on the journey, because it was this feeling of everything's going to be okay. Like, I'm going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. I'm going to get better. And just this overwhelming sense of peace and just positivity. And
And
I
then you
remember
put your feet on the brake after that moment.
I look at it as I like threw myself out of the car. It was like, so I remember I told everybody for a while that, a while, for a day, I told everybody, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to get better. It's going to be okay. But I didn't know the art of that means you have to hang out in that space no matter what's showing up for you, no matter what's happening. And I think I looked at it as, okay, I'll hang out there if you keep showing me like physical proof. And of course, I didn't have physical proof like that. I mean,
Right.
I don't know, whether it was, I don't remember what threw me back. All the years, I won't lie, are pretty blurry at this point, but I don't know if it was some other issue cropping up, or whether it was just a
Hmm.
really bad sick day or whatever it was, but I did not stay there. And I think from there, it was sort of this cycle of despair constantly. I
Hmm.
think it was, I almost, I was thinking at the time, like the way I was interpreting is like, I'm like, oh, I must just be deluding myself because nothing's changing. Nothing's changing physically.
Hmm.
So let me just like collapse into despair, basically.
Hmm.
And it was this constant cycle. And I'm a huge advocate for that too, is I didn't see how out of control my mental health was getting, because I
Right.
saw
Because you
it.
were so accelerated, right?
Exactly.
The
And
speed of your
so,
mind is searching for so much information, right?
and also, like, I think I kept saying, and I see this on I kept saying, well, if you fix the illness, then I'd be fine. Then I'll be happy. Then I won't be anxious. Fix the illness. And the mental health was, to me, the simple. And at a certain point, and I tell this people, it it doesn't really matter at a certain point who was the chicken and the egg, because now you got a separate issue at hand that you got to look at and that you got to deal
Right.
with, right? And so I definitely got in my own way. I mean, I was so during that journey, I got so steadfast of everything had to be quote unquote all natural. So
Hmm.
I got that way about. I also had really bad reactions to in my defense. I had very bad reactions to medications. My body was just so
Right.
sensitive, and I had all those. I got this bladder disease that's responding to
Mm.
things I'm putting in. I have all these GI issues. I mean, we could go on and on and on, trying to figure out my hormones. Well, the whole thing was such a nightmare when I look back. And so I got adamant, like, oh, the food thing got out of control. It was, so restrictive, and it was really truly the belief that, like, God forbid I took one bite of a chicken that didn't grow up on a farm, somehow that's going to make me worse, right? And really, believing every medication was terrible and poison, and I mean, I don't know if I
Right.
use those words, but like, no, that's not my route. I
Right.
need to do it in some. So I remember people suggesting at certain points, you might want to look at some medication just to help you with the depression and anxiety. And I was like, no, no, no. I was so steadfast. And meanwhile, I'm actually getting a post-traumatic stress response as the years are going on. And I start recognizing, I kept saying, what happened to I think it all of a sudden it hit me probably 3 years in. And I kept saying, what happened to my life? What happened to my life? What happened to my life? How did I get here? It was when the fall happened, which is when I had gotten the mono. It was about 3 years in. The sight, the smells, the leaves, all of those things. I was having those full blown kind of PTSD episodes of just full of adrenaline and panic. And, just kept saying, what happened to my life? What happened to my life? I lost my life. I lost my life.
And
And
PTSD is such a it's so grateful for you to bring this as well, because um it's people struggle so much, and there's a lot of judgment around PTSD because people who are not familiar sometimes can interpretate, an episode of someone having a PTSD episode, in a wrong way, and and lack of knowledge of understanding what's going on in the mind. It's the trauma, it's strong, you know and as you were telling your story, it looks like with you it was like gradual, but it was so intense for you to arrive to the point to have the PTSD, right? Everything that you lived was unfolding more and more and more and more and more, but intense, right?
And it was just sort of one day, it was that, like, holy shit, what has happened on it? That was sort of the mindset. And I think I talk about that with clients, right? Especially if you got any other like childhood wounds, which everybody's going to have, that feeling of being trapped, that feeling of being misunderstood. And like here, there were times I could not even walk up the stairs, to get to the apartment I was living in. I'd have to just lay in the car for 2 hours before I could get the strength to basically crawl up the stairs. I remember that one. I don't think I'll ever forget it. And then you've got people telling you it's just like, oh, maybe you're depressed, or, think positively, or, especially in the medical world, well, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to tell you. And I think it was definitely too, there was that feeling of being so trapped in my own body, and I think towards the end of, right. And before I got to the hospital, I remember, like, I would have dreams, and I remember watching Me Before You, and like recent, in the last few years, and he was in a car accident and was, paralyzed completely. And I'm not trying to compare anything there, but that he had these dreams. They would say, his caretakers would say, he has dreams where he's like snowboarding and doing those things. And I remember I could relate to that. I would have dreams where I would alternate. Some dreams would be that I walked somewhere and couldn't get back, and was stuck because I'd walked a short distance and couldn't, and just this, it was like acting out in the dream where I was stuck and physically couldn't move. So like what to do. And then I remember the other flip of that was having dreams that I was running, or I was riding a horse, or I was doing those things, and I'd wake up and be like, and holy shit, I'm still here, strapped in this body. And at that point I couldn't even stand. I couldn't even, get out of bed. So it progressed to that level. I started losing tons of weight, and some of that was driven by the restrictive eating, but some of it was just, I think, also from being just so sick, because to this day, my metabolism is a little wonky. It's not that easy for me to put on weight.
Mhm.
But so I started accelerating super fast. That was also something, I was traumatized. Like, go to doctors. I'm like, I'm losing weight. Can
Right.
somebody like help? And they all blew me off, blew me off, blew me off. And all of a sudden they only cared when I was 30 pounds less. Now I'm at 90 pounds. And,
Mhm.
it was sort of just always blame me, blame me, blame me, blame me. And, that the worst it got to was 79 pounds. And I think I lost the ability to walk probably at 95 pounds. And I had so many symptoms at that point. I had so much neurological stuff. I had
Mhm.
the dysautonomia, this POTS. So like my blood pressure would drop and my heart rate would go through the roof from just even sitting up. And
Mhm.
I couldn't fight off like this basic infection, but I couldn't tolerate treatment for it.
Mhm.
I got IV. I was put on TPN, which is total parental nutrition. Oh my God, it's been so long. Is that what it's called? But
Mhm.
it's the full blown, everything coming through a PIC line in your
Mhm.
vein.
And then at
And
this point, you were at the hospital.
I was actually doing the TPN at home.
Mhm.
Um, but I couldn't like I was still having, and I own that. I will tell you at this point, it took me many years after to be able to own that. Like my mental health was also out of control at this point, just
Mhm.
complete, when you're that malnourished, you also are just, you're not rational, you're not making neurotransmitter. I mean,
Right.
just completely anxious, like so anxious about everything,
Mhm.
so despair, depression didn't even cut it. I'm talking about like full blown despair. And so,
Right.
I look back, I'm like, probably could have tolerated the treatment better if I was a little more relaxed about it. But I was just so
Mhm.
anxious about everything. And so I would like gain weight and couldn't keep it on because I'd start having like diarrhea, even though you're not supposed to have that on the IV
Mhm.
nutrition. And I was eating a little bit. And then I was admitted to the hospital. I had to be like medevac from Florida back to Connecticut. I was admitted to the
Mhm.
hospital. And again, they were like, well, go home. They literally basically told me, go home and eat. And if you can't eat, you're not going to like what we have to do. Like, and, I made it like 5 or 6 more weeks. Uh, and then I had a spiritual near death experience about
Yeah,
2 days
that's what
before
I
I was
was.
I was admitted to the
Yeah.
hospital.
So
Um,
can you tell us about it?
yeah, so I it was definitely a crazy time in general. I mean, I was sort of my energetic boundaries at that through that whole time were just sort of non-existent because I was in such a
Mhm.
weakened state. So I definitely had, but they weren't pleasant. They weren't, integrated. I had a ton of spiritual experiences. I could feel energy at an all-time high, but I was too weak to really be, like, was not in state to be. That was not a good thing.
Mhm.
And it was probably, to a degree that's not healthy. It was picking up and absorbing
Right.
all the time.
Mhm.
So I definitely had some crazy experiences, and I
Mhm.
I think I didn't know at the time if that was one of them until like, but I think I knew at the time. I'm like, oh no, this was an NDE, and I
Mhm.
left. I would like, I was in and out of sort of sleep isn't there. I couldn't properly sleep either. I had horrible insomnia dreams, but like
Mhm.
I was in and out of rest all the time because I couldn't do like the basic thing. I mean, even holding the cell phone would just completely debilitate me. So like I'd have to
Mhm.
do something like that and rest. And all of a sudden I started feeling a lot of energy and I didn't really know what was happening. And the next thing I
Mhm.
knew, I was completely out of my body. And I was not, no, I did not see my body. I've been asked that. I was not looking down on my body, but I no longer felt like my physical body. I only
Right.
felt this pure, just sort of lightness and bliss and just ease and just completely out. There was no physical body attached to me. I was in just sort of pure
Right.
love. I know it's corny, but that's really what the only word
Yeah,
I
but
can
that
come
is.
up with here on the earth plane. Like,
Mhm.
and I
And then
remember
you're taken over by all this feeling of love, of peace, of light.
it's hard to really describe into words. Yeah, those are the closest words I can use. They're not
Which are
strong enough,
beautiful.
actually. Yeah, but it's such a powerful thing.
Beyond.
And exactly. And I knew it was sort of I never knew my one grandmother, and I knew she was there talking to me, but I was not like specific images. I just felt them
You
and like
felt,
other
you knew.
ancestors. Yes.
Hmm.
And I was sort of just like being pulled into this light, and it was so incredible. And then next thing that happened was I started going in and out of my body. And what I mean by that is like I'd feel the physical and it felt horrendous. And then I was like, I'd come back out
Right.
and I started getting flooded. There were three memories. I can only remember two now. But they were really small moments. And they were like the first time I ever sat on a pony when I was like a little kid on a trail in the woods.
Hmm.
And then I had like a few months earlier, I had to go to an appointment. Both my parents took me and I had to lay in the back of the car, but we were laughing. We hadn't laughed in a long time. And that was there. And there was one other memory that I honestly don't have because it was such a small thing. And it was like my ancestors speaking to me saying like, this is what you would stay for. This is what you're here for. This is what you would stay for. And I remember still doing the hovering thing a bit. And it was like, the only way I can explain it is I had a choice then. I had a choice.
Right.
And not everybody always has that choice, but I had a choice to leave or stay. And I kind of I knew I had to stay. And as soon as I made that decision, I slammed back into my body. And my body felt so heavy and so like more pain than ever. And it's not even pain to me can be just from being so sick. It's not
Right,
particular,
because you
right? Like it was
came
just
back to the density, right, of the
exactly. And,
body.
and, and just like when I say pain, just like in a body that is so incredibly ill and
Right.
weak and dying, literally
Mm.
dying. And
Mm.
and just, yes, and the density, exactly, everything being so physical. And I remember
Mhm.
just processing what happened, but also kind of like, what the hell did I choose this for? And it was about 36 hours later, I think, that my mom came in and said, like, your doctor, my GP was coming to the house at the time, and she said, she says it's time, you got to go in. Um, I went into, so I thought that was sort of my moment of when I was like nearly had the death, but I went in on through an ambulance. I had to take an ambulance
Right.
anywhere, and I got in the hospital, and treatment wasn't great either. It was still sort of like, what's this hysterical head case doing, basically? And they did their work. I had a mix of like some great people in there and some very
Mm.
dismissive,
Mhm.
not great people. And I was told I would need a G tube, which is, a tube in your stomach. And
Mhm.
I remember being really reluctant for that because I was, in my eyes, like, I wasn't eating because of all my GI symptoms. The G tube doesn't get around that, but they were pushing that's really the only long-term solution here. You cannot stay on like IV nutrition for very long. Um, and I was freaking out about the
Right.
formula because I had milk and blah, blah, blah. And they were insistent that this would be the solution. So I said, I didn't really feel like I had a choice. I said yes to that. And it was, I was thinking about that the other day because I have a pretty big scar from that. And I was thinking
Mhm.
about the other, like, that was actually so incredibly painful once the lidocaine wore off because, yeah, they've cut a hole in your stomach.
Right.
And I remember just like whimpering I didn't want to take pain meds because I was having reactions to
Mhm.
meds. So I didn't take anything. I was just whimpering the entire night once the lidocaine wore off. Uh, I'm sure it's not lidocaine. I'm sure it's stronger than that, but you know what I mean?
Mhm.
The anesthetic on
Yes.
it.
Yeah, sure.
And I think I might have finally given in and taken something that's even, I had 24-hour care at that point, and one of them
Mhm.
was even there and was like, Laura, please take something, take something. And I thought, like, I was like, okay. And then they started like adding the formula, and they're like, okay, you're gonna go home tomorrow. Back to the state of being in the bed, but like, got your nutrition.
Right.
And they switched doctors because it was the weekend, so like they rotate. And I remember he came. I really liked this doctor, but I didn't have him for very
Mhm.
long. But he came storming in and he had just got my lab work back, and he was like, I need your consent to put a pick again, to go put a pick line back in my arm. He was like, I need to put a pick line in you immediately, like your organs are shutting down. And I was just caught. I was like, I thought I was going home. Like, I didn't understand what was happening. I thought I was going home. I kept saying that. And he's like, basically, the situation is either I need your consent or I can send you to hospice. And I basically, obviously, was like, well, then do it. Because, you know, I had decided to live, and I wasn't going to, even though I kept saying I didn't want to live at this point. I mean, I had begged my mom to not keep me going at this point because it was just such a miserable existence of being in this body that was dying. And I think that's when all of that, I still sort of knew I wasn't going to leave because, you know, I had already had my near death experience. I think everybody
Right.
around me was panicking. You know, they called my family and they're like, you need to get here immediately. We don't know if she's going to pull through. And they had a nurse come do it. And my, heart rate like practically stopped, and so she had to code, and then they had to call in some special interventional radiologists to come in on a Saturday. And I remember, you know, they were all watching in the little OR thing, and then they got the pick in. And I think I didn't realize at the time that it was severe. I was also, people tell you I was like on another planet at this point. You know, they deemed I was
Right.
rational and it was questionable, you know, but I I kept sort of like, I didn't understand the severity of like, they were like, you need to eat or you're going to die, you know? And I was just so focused on my stomach problem. Like, I was just like, no, to me, it seemed rational at the time, is like, food makes me feel deathly ill, so I'm not going to eat food. Even though, you know, that's the part that was really sort of the disconnect, and of, I didn't seem to grasp, you're going to die if you do not eat food, no matter how painful and horrible and symptomatic you are from it. And so the 5 weeks there, I was in 2 weeks there. I was transferred to a rehab hospital. You know, looking back now, I know that from my records too. They were all, my condition was considered fair. You know, and I do remember there were times again where I felt like I was leaving almost, just because I think it was just from being so ill.
Right.
And then I got a UTI in there, and then all that was spiking of fever and all of that. And I think I put on 3 pounds in that time. And I remember I kept saying to myself, like, why would I choose this? Because I was still completely bedridden. You know,
Right.
cool. I had put on 3-4 pounds tops. They couldn't figure what I've been trying to tell them the whole time. They couldn't figure out why, because I was, you know, accepting all the tube feeds or whatever. But I think that was, again, that metabolism being so wonked out from being ill. And I think I definitely know, you know, what I was really hitting all-time lows now is because I'm in a hospital this sick, and you have, yeah, there were doctors telling my mom that it was just in my head, you know, and that uh, you know, it was a whole delusional and all of those
Right.
things, that to be that ill and to have people turning their back on you, the people you
Right.
are trusting,
Right.
to almost, you know, to act. I remember an argument with the psychologist would come in every day, and we would argue every, you know, I said, sure, I'm sure there's a mind body piece to it, but that ain't all of it, you know. And he thought it was just all some, you know, internal conflict. It was just so horrible to be that ill, and to have people like convincing my mother at that point that, oh, you know, no, it's just in her head, she's not actually sick, you know. And to have like, you know, it's sort of read between the lines and of what's, and
And
that, I
how
think at that
and
point
at
is when I said, I want to leave, you know, like, why would I
uh-huh.
stay in this earth for this?
So how it started to shift
Yeah.
when
So
you started to turn the page.
when I
How did
really
you do
started,
that?
yes, when I really turned the page. So I thought those were some of my rock bottoms at that point. Was, I mean, I just wanted to die so badly at that point, because even though I had the NDA, at this point we're more in the despair and the depression and the,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and just the like, this isn't a quality of life to be this ill.
Right.
Um, and so then, you know, and I remember it was such this, I thought this was my rock bottom moment. Was my There was a social worker in the hospital working on this case, and um she could see, sorry about that there, she could see that I had no sort of say in anything, because my parents were like completely taking over the show, you know, because I still had my
Right.
medical, I had my rights still, I still had those hadn't been taken away from me, because I was
Mm-hmm.
considered, you know, rational and all those things. But
Mm-hmm.
when you are that incapacitated at 24 years old,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I can't even stand up and walk. So, you know, how many rights do you actually have?
Right.
And the insurance was cutting on this place. On My dad was like, "You're not going back home in this state." And so the option was a nursing home. And my mother said, and I look back and she was right, "You will die in a nursing home." And their biggest concern at that point was they wanted my mental health and the eating issues taken care of. They were like, "We will treat the rest of this. We'll worry about this. Right now, we care about your mental health." And so they
Mm-hmm.
gave me the option of, you're either going to a psych ward or you're going to an eating disorder facility to get your nutrition taken care of. And I remember just feeling so, at the time, I was like, I ain't going to psych ward, as I said, you know,
Right.
and then but I also was like, I had a lot of stigma with like eating disorders. I'd always seen them as this body image thing, and this,
Mm-hmm.
I never, you know, I was fortunate enough to not have gone through that when I was younger. So
Right.
I just never,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and
It
I was
didn't
freaking out.
resonate with you.
No, it didn't
Yeah.
resonate at all, because I was like, I want to eat more than anything. You know,
Right.
my goal is to gain weight. I'm not eating because of physical reasons and blah, blah, blah. But I remember at that point, it was like, well, what choice do I have? I remember saying that to the social worker. She's like, well, what does Laura want to do? I said, what choice do I really have in this? You know? So I
Mm-hmm.
said, fine, send me an eating disorder facility, you know, whatever. And I mean, I was in despair, don't get me wrong, but like, I
Right.
had to be medevac now to Arizona. And that is actually where I hit my rock bottom to turn the page. And because I got there, and at first I was sort of optimistic, like maybe they'll hear this situation. I've seen this before, like not eating for
Mm-hmm.
illness reasons and stuff. But the problem is when you go in there, and I get it, you know, now I'm also getting a master's in the field, you have to treat everybody almost like they're lying, really, because that's part of addictions, and that's so typical
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
addictions and ease. So you're just sort of treated like you're full of shit, you know, when I'm saying like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not eating, you know, because of the illnesses and whatever. And I remember the doctor was just like, blew off the CFSME diagnosis, because she's like, well, no shit, you're not eating, so that's why you're. And I'm like, this came after all that, you know, the not eating is a result of all
Mm-hmm.
that. And I now, to me, was like, now's the real rock bottom, because I thought it was bad before, but at least I had family and friends who believed me. And now I'm in
Now
this
you are on your
facility.
own.
Right. I'm in
Mm-hmm.
this facility that's like a level 1 facility. We don't have phones. We don't, everything's taken away from you. You don't even have like hand sanitizer because people drink it. And like, and I had like a one-on-one tech, because I couldn't, you know, sit up, I couldn't wash myself and all this stuff. And you know, nobody believes me, and the people around me are sort of resentful of me, because they saw when it was what they're walking is a lot of respect for that journey too, but
Mm-hmm.
they're at the same weight, and they're still exercising and able to run around, and I'm in this bed and can't even sit up. And so they also thought I
Mm-hmm.
was full of shit, because they're looking at it strictly from the lens of, you know, traditional
Mm-hmm.
anorexia.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to die at that point. I remember every morning I'd wake up and just couldn't believe I was still there. And I was literally planning ways I could end it. You know, I was here in this
Mm-hmm.
facility where it's completely basically locked down. It's not locked down, but I mean, it's so
Right.
monitored, you know,
Mm-hmm.
thinking like, okay, maybe they'll put the wheelchair, like they'll leave me for a second and somehow I can roll it off the mountain in
Right.
the desert, you know, whatever. And, you know, things that are not plausible. And I
Mm-hmm.
finally I had this tech, and I had cards from my friends that I had given them in the hospital, and somebody had written a card. It was "Be kind, be true, be you." And I remember the tech said that to me, and she was like, "Ha ha ha! Isn't that funny, Laura? Be kind, be true, be you." And I just looked at her and I said, "You want the truth?" I was like, "I just want to die." And in that moment, I think that was probably the ultimate surrender. She went, by per protocol, she had to go get the psychiatrist. And I remember the psychiatrist came in and asked me if I was suicidal. And I thought about saying no, but I'm like, all right, 3 minutes ago, I just told her I want to die. And I said, yes. And she said, do you have a plan? And I looked at her and I said, well, how would I have a plan?
Right.
And but I said to her, and I said, she's like, I want to start you on XYZ. And I said, do whatever you want. And I think that was the biggest surrender point, is I got out of my own way and I said, do whatever you want. And because I realized my way wasn't working anymore.
So you arrived to a point of you were
total
exhausted.
Surrender. Total
surrendered, exhausted, and letting go and
let go of all, because I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep fighting like this. And clearly what I was doing wasn't working. And I just was at my wit's end, like you said, complete exhaustion. And I said, do whatever you want. And I remember that when that kicked in, I was still in a wheelchair. I was still, disabled and all of these things. I was still incredibly ill. But all of a sudden, I remember the lights coming on, where I'll never forget the moment I will never forget the moment I thought, maybe I don't want to die. And so, where I say is, like, the medication didn't get me well. The medication was part of me getting on my own way to at least allow my brain to start allowing me to think a little differently. And then I started having those profound spiritual moments of, now that I don't want to die so badly, I'm still in a wheelchair, still need help, but I'm slowly progressing. But I remember realizing I can still be happy.
That point you were, so now you were in this place of surrender.
Totally.
I think what you brought is so important, Laura, because all the fighting, all the fighting against the condition, and you were brought to a place of acceptance and, okay, let go. And as I mentioned before, I have these people that are doing exactly, and they still are fighting with the condition. And I had already guests that went through the same situation as you, and how important it is to surrender, right? To accept, to go to this place of, okay, let me try to understand and decompress, right?
And to stop fighting. And I know it sounds so counterintuitive, but this is, for at least the people I come across on this journey, stop trying so hard. And what I mean by that,
trying,
and trying, and you're just resisting and resisting and resisting. And when I had that moment too, so I had the surrendering to the doctor, literally to a psychiatrist, like, to surrendering in that moment of just sort of saying, I don't know what to do anymore, And so for me, it was surrendering to the medication to at least help my mind. And then the acceptance. And I want to say that when I talk about that, that doesn't mean that didn't fix my illness. I'm not even sure, I don't want to confuse people that, oh, I just needed to, like, go on an antidepressant and that. No, it had nothing to do with that. Actually, most of my physical didn't change. It was that it got me in a headspace to begin the journey.
It allowed you to shift.
Exactly.
Is the key.
Exactly.
The turning of the key,
the turning key. And in the acceptance was, I remember, being in the wheelchair. And my friend, I had a couple friends at this point, and they were playing horseshoes in Arizona and in the sun in the desert. And I remember just watching them, and I couldn't play at this point. I didn't have the physical abilities or anything like that, but I remember realizing I'm happy. I can be, I am truly happy in this moment, just sitting in the sun in this wheelchair, watching them play horseshoes, and this realization, I can truly be happy, and in that moment, it stopped mattering. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it didn't matter if I was going to get out of the wheelchair or not get out of the wheelchair, or whatever level of functioning I was going to get back or not get
Because you
back. Like,
went to the moment,
I
right?
went to the moment, and that I could find joy and meaning in life. And that was, I
Appreciation.
had forgotten about in the NDE. The joy and meaning was for these tiny moments. And
Mm-hmm.
that, just like there, sitting in the sun, watching them play horseshoes,
Right.
was pure contentment, pure happiness. And I think I knew from there, and that journey, I mean, that was 7 years ago. And it's like, I was still considering myself healing. I think it's miraculous where I am now, but that's an
Yes,
ongoing
it
journey, and
is.
it's been bumpy. But I think that's where the turning, they were all, the surrender was the turning point, and then the acceptance was the turning point.
Mm-hmm.
And then, from there, when I got out of there after 2.5 months, I flew home on a plane in a wheelchair here. I'd medevaced on these planes, and, on a stretcher.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was progress. And I had to, like, begin the walk. We did. We went on to treat the illnesses at that point. I found, then it was sort of when you're open to it, I found this great doctor in New York City. And I was in a place where it was like, okay, I will do exactly as you tell me, versus before it would be like, if you tell me something and then I take it and I don't have a good reaction to it, then I quit it and then I complicate it was just
Mm-hmm. The
following,
resistance.
yeah, exactly what he had intended. And, and I did treat, I've still to this day, I've done some conventional things. And then once I was doing that, I discovered neuroplasticity, which is basically
Mm-hmm.
retraining the brain. And I loved it. I found it fascinating, and it made a lot of sense to me. So I made that sort of my core.
Mm-hmm.
I have no problem. I work with clients and I say I have no problem with the physically supporting the body. It's just not getting caught up that, again, that mentality of, oh, this treatment is the end all, or this is it, or this
Mm-hmm.
is it. And
Mm-hmm.
I learned to kind of go even more with the flow. So it was a bad day, I just went with the bad day, and and enjoyed all the progresses, and all
Like
those good
so many
moments.
nice things that had
Yep.
this such huge impact on your health. So you let
Yep.
go of control and allow life to be, right. And
Right.
this is a huge, because
And
control leads to so much stress, right? When we are
it's
trying
so
to control,
exhausting.
it is
It's
exhausting.
so
So
exhausting. And how
just
can you heal?
allowing, yes, so allowing things to be as they were, acceptance, right? And just surrender and appreciation. So many beautiful things that had such a huge impact on
Yeah.
your healing, right?
Yeah. And I think, you know, people ask, and it's like, I don't discount all the other facets, but it's like those foundations
Mm-hmm.
make room, and if you want to get into this, okay, if you're in a state of acceptance and allowing, you're in a relaxed parasympathetic state, and that's really where a lot of healing can occur. You can't really heal in a sympathetic dominance, which is your fight or
Yes,
flight and your stress
exactly.
response. And that goes for anybody, even if it's not illness, is if you're in that constant fight or flight stage,
Mm-hmm.
it affects, your cognition, your blood pressure,
Everything.
your digestion, your sleep. I mean, and that's what primes you for illness down the road. So I think really being in that state, and truly just so much at that point. I was thinking about that recently. I'm like, God, I lost a little bit of that, but I mean, everything was just so mind blowing in terms of appreciation. It was like to be in a car and see the sunset, and
Yeah.
just those every little thing. And like, I remember I walked
And
to the,
then more and more,
yeah,
because we get in this state, in this energy,
exactly,
and then you attract, because is that what you're putting out, right? And then it's
exactly,
like
exactly,
more and more, and then you create
exactly,
more connections in your brain, because
exactly.
and more emotions, and then it's beautiful.
And and just those, celebrating those things. I remember the first time I walked to the mailbox, which wasn't that far, but that was fucking amazing, and it was just, and And I remember too, like if it was a really bad day, I'd just check out in terms of watch something funny or, watch the birds and just sort of
Mhm.
be with it. And I try to keep those prints. I mean, I love to say I'm always in that state. I'm not, I'm a human being, but
Mhm.
it's, that recognition for me to come back and I can feel the physiological changes. My
Mhm.
body, I do appreciate that, has that super sensitivity to when I'm not handling stress or to this day, or to when I am going back into that control and worry and
Mhm.
obsessions and whatever, or micromanagement, I can feel all the
Right.
physiological changes happen for me and just
And you
letting
know
myself
now,
surrender
you
to that.
know. Yeah. So you got into neuroplasticity and then
Oh,
what
so I
happened?
started with, yeah, that I started making, there were a couple programs that are still out there. I
Mhm.
started those with the foundation, their foundation, and I saw massive gains where it was like I remember my walking, I was increasing 100 steps like every week. I mean, you have to remember I'm starting at like 400, which is like you walk into your kitchen and back to your room. But like I remember adding the neuroplasticity and I could start increasing like 100 every day or two, something like that. I don't quite, it's been
Right.
so long, but
Mhm.
everything was just sort of gains. And then I went on to, I ended up, I made a ton of gains. And then about a year in, I did have a very big flare up and it made me go look for more programs in that realm of things
Right.
because I realized, and that's what I got out of the next program, was I hadn't been taught how to deal with all those stressors that were there before I was ill.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
with the retraining the brain, it was like learning how to break the illness patterns that were firing.
Mhm.
And I know that sounds funny to somebody. This is not about positive thinking and all this. It's literally remapping the brain. This is part of pain science
Yeah.
as well, right? So I mean that
Mhm.
you and I could sit here for hours talking about, but
Mhm.
because I know people hear that and think it's about like psychological, positive, poly. It's really
Mhm.
not. It has nothing to
Mhm.
do with that. But I hadn't been taught how to become aware of those constant kind of unconscious stressors that were
Yeah.
running all the time. And that's actually some of my biggest interest now because I'm like, if you don't change the way you were living, you are going to go either right, and right back there. You're either going to go back there or you're going to create something new,
Yes.
physical health, mental health, whatever
Yeah.
it is. So you've got to transform your entire way of living and being and relating to the world.
Mhm.
And so then, that gave me that foundation. And then I went on further to understand even more the real mind body work
Right.
um and also just the spiritual journey and the also relating to like being a highly sensitive person and
Mhm. So,
empathic and all that.
one word that you use that I love it, it's being aware. So the awareness, how how it opens, right? Everything, all the windows and
Absolutely.
doors for us to shift, to understand,
Yep.
to keep improving, right? Because
Absolutely.
if you're aware, you are able to understand and then accept and then it's interesting because at least with me, when I became aware of my own stuff, I wanted to see more, and
Yeah.
I wanted to
Yes.
transform more, and then it becomes very interesting to take this inner journey, right, and become
Absolutely.
more aware, because then you see the effects, the opposite. So before all the craziness, and now, oh, so this is the cause for that, right? So it's amazing. Then you became a coach, right?
I did. I became a coach 5.5, almost 6 years ago.
Mm.
Wow. Time's flying. I became a coach and I definitely knew right off the bat that my interest was more on the mind body connection and the
Mhm.
deeper kind of work. Because I did do also the nutrition piece and
Mhm.
I don't light up the same way. I mean, I can do that, make some food
Right.
recommendation, or it can be
Mm-hmm.
fun too for somebody who has no idea how to eat healthier and stuff. But
Yeah.
I really had a passion in more the somatic work and the mind body
Mm-hmm.
stuff and integrating and again and a way of being and sort of how I say is designing your life too, because this is not just about healing an illness. And when you can get off of that mentality, it helps because you don't need it so badly. It's not that you need that to have a happy and content life. And it's about really transforming and recreating your life all around.
Yeah.
And that's the real fun work.
And after all this experience, all this roller coaster, because he was, what is the biggest life lesson?
I think what just was coming to me is besides because we could talk about and I've talked about it so many times is surrender, acceptance, is it's those small moments. It's really that is what life is about. It's those small moments and the presence you can bring to those. That
Yeah.
is, that is what you look
Mhm.
back on when you walk away from this lifetime, this physical lifetime. And that is where so much transformation can happen.
Right. Just uh, appreciation and love being alive, right? Just
And just in the smallest things, not constantly waiting. I'm not perfect. I don't try to pretend I forget this stuff too, right? But like just when you have those glimpses of like, wow, that butterfly is so beautiful that just flew by my
yeah,
head, or look how happy my dog is, or
yeah.
wow, this piece of art is beautiful, or wow, even if it is watching like a funny show, wow, this is so funny. It feels so
Hmm.
good to laugh. It's those small moments or those small connections with people, having a laugh with somebody.
Yeah, and as you said, connection. So now you are more connected to yourself, right? To everything, to all the environment, to life,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes.
That is
Yeah.
so beautiful, Laura. What an incredible journey. And
Thank you.
after all that, would you say that life is beautiful?
Life is so beautiful. You're a human. You get to say, you get to have your moments where you say life is annoying right now or whatever, life is tough or life's annoying or, I want to go back to bed today. A friend and I have, she's a coach and we have a joke about those days where it's just like, you want to go back to bed and start over, you can have all of those because that's all part of the human experience. But overall, like even to have those contrasting experiences is what makes everything so beautiful, and
Yes.
life is so beautiful if you can find the things right in front of you.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much
Thank you for
for
having me.
all this. It was amazing, your
Thank you so much
stories.
for having me.
Yeah, so inspiring.
Thank you.
And would you like to leave us a message?
Okay, this is something that's been a theme in the recent weeks. No matter how much your head convinces you something is important to obsess or worry or overthink about, it really isn't. And your real power lies in coming back into your body and being present in the moment.
Yes. Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Laura. It was a pleasure to have you in the show.
Thanks so much for having me.